The fog had lifted from the grounds of Weatherford Hall by mid-morning, but the library still held the chill of early autumn when the twins burst through the double doors without warning. "Your Grace," Mrs. Pemberton called from the corridor, her voice apologetic. "I tried to tell them you were working. Welcome back, my amazing family. Before we dive into today's story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Give this video a thumbs up and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Your love and support mean the world. And trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Now, let's get right into the story." James Curtis looked up from a mountain of overdue creditors' notices and saw two small figures already halfway across the Persian carpet. His son Edmund wore one stocking higher than the other. His daughter Caroline clutched a painted wooden horse missing half its tail. He set down his pen immediately. "Come," he said, and they needed no further permission. Edmund scrambled onto the arm of the leather chair, breathless. "Papa, we found a secret passage. Behind the blue room. It goes all the way to the kitchens, I think, but Caroline was afraid of spiders." "I was not," Caroline protested, climbing onto James's knee. There were only 2 spiders. Edmund screamed louder. "I did not scream. I express alarm." James felt the knot in his chest loosen for the first time that morning. "And did you inform anyone of this architectural discovery? Or did you keep it to yourselves like proper little conspirators?" "We told Mama," Caroline said, before she seemed to remember. Her face fell. I forgot." The silence that followed pressed against James's ribs. Edmund looked at his shoes. Caroline wound her small fingers into her father's cravat and held on as if afraid he might disappear. "Your mother," James said quietly, "would have been very proud of your bravery. Both of you." He pulled them closer, breathing in the scent of chalk dust and jam, and particular wildness of children who had been outdoors. For a moment, there was no estate to salvage, no debts to settle, no house crumbling around him. Then Mrs. Pemberton cleared her throat from the doorway. "Forgive me, Your Grace, but Miss Maggie requested the children be brought to the drawing room when they returned from the gardens. She wished to speak with them about their deportment." James hesitated. The word deportment sat badly in his mouth, but he nodded. "Very well. Tell Miss Maggie I shall join her shortly." Mrs. Pemberton dipped her head and ushered the children out. Edmund looked back once, as if hoping his father might call them back and let them stay forever in the safety of leather chairs and dusty books. He did not call them back. James watched the door close, then forced his gaze to return to the accounts. Tenant rents fallen by 1/3. Roof repairs deferred another season. Coal stores insufficient for winter. All problems that had been manageable when his father lived, and the world still made sense. Everything had changed with Catherine's death, and now he was trying to rebuild what grief had nearly destroyed. That was why the engagement had been necessary. Practical. Right. Diane Maggie's most recent letter lay atop the pile of correspondence, her handwriting sharp and elegant as cut glass. "I have given considerable thought to the children's education," she had written. "Structure and discipline will serve them far better than indulgence. I trust you will agree that sentimentality has no place in the rearing of future heirs. We shall make them worthy of the Curtis name." It was not a warm sentiment, but then he had not been seeking warmth. He had been seeking stability, order, someone who could restore the household to its former dignity and train the twins to carry the weight of a legacy that was theirs by birth. Diane's father had not only agreed to a generous settlement, he had offered investments, political connections, and access to a network of industrialists who could breathe new life into the dying Weatherford estates. And a mother for the children. James murmured to the empty room. That is worth more than affection. He rose and moved to the tall windows overlooking the east lawn. Somewhere above him, in the bright nursery wing, his children were with a woman who would soon become their stepmother. He tried to feel relieved. He tried to imagine them at dinner a year from now. Diane at the head of the table, composed and graceful. Caroline sitting straighter. Edmund learning to temper his enthusiasm with propriety. Perhaps it would be good for them. Perhaps it would fill the hollow his wife's absence had left. But something cold and formless stirred beneath his breastbone. Something that whispered he had made a terrible mistake. He shook the thought away and rang for his secretary. There were contracts to review. A duke did not entertain doubts once a course had been set. 3 floors above, in the dim corridor outside the nursery, a young maid paused with a breakfast tray balanced on her hip and wondered if conscience was worth losing her position. Sharon Hartley steadied the tray. 2 boiled eggs, soldiers of buttered toast, a small pot of honey, and drew a slow breath. The eggs were still warm. Mrs. Connolly had frowned when Sharon requested them. Miss Maggie sent word the children are not to have breakfast until noon, the cook had said. Something about teaching them patience and gratitude. They're 4 years old, Sharon had replied, reaching for the eggs herself. They don't need lessons in hunger. They need food. Now she stood outside the nursery door, which was closed but not latched. She could hear nothing inside. No laughter. No games. Only the faint rustle of fabric and the creak of floorboards. She nudged the door open with her foot and stepped inside. Edmund and Caroline sat on the floor near the coal fireplace. Edmund had his arms wrapped around his knees, his head bowed. Caroline held her wooden horse, so tightly Sharon feared it might snap. They both looked up when she entered. There was no joy in their faces, only a careful, quiet hope. "There you are," Sharon said softly, setting the tray on the low table near the window. "I thought you might be hungry." Edmund's eyes went to the eggs, then to the door, as if expecting someone to appear and snatch the tray away. "Are we allowed?" he whispered. Sharon's heart cracked. "Of course you're allowed," she said, kneeling beside them. "Come now, before it gets cold." But even as they crept forward to eat, she felt the weight of what she had just done. Miss Maggie would find out. She always did. And Sharon had no doubt there would be consequences. Sharon had learned early in her years at Weatherford Hall that a good servant made herself invisible. She moved through corridors like a shadow, kept her eyes downcast, and never spoke unless spoken to. It was a skill that served her well, particularly in the 3 weeks since Miss Di and Maggie had arrived at the estate. But tonight, invisibility felt like cowardice. She had been turning down the lamps in the west corridor when she heard it. A sound so small and broken it might have been the wind rattling the old casements. Except Sharon knew every creak and whisper of this house, and this was neither wind nor settling timbers. This was weeping. She paused at the top of the servant's stair, her hand still on the lamp's brass key. The sound came again, muffled and desperate, from somewhere below. The cellar, perhaps, or the old stillroom that no one had used since the late Duchess's time. Sharon set down her lamp and followed the sound down the narrow stone steps, her pulse quickening with each turn. The air grew colder as she descended, thick with the smell of damp earth and forgotten things. At the base of the stairs, a single candle burned in a wall sconce, casting long shadows across the flagstones. And there, huddled together in the corner near the wine racks, were Edmund and Caroline. They wore only their night clothes, thin cotton that did nothing against the cellar's chill. Edmund had his arm around his sister, who shook so violently her teeth chattered. Both their faces were streaked with tears. "Dear God," Sharon breathed, rushing forward. She dropped to her knees beside them, her hands already reaching to check for injuries. "What happened? Who brought you down here?" Edmund flinched at her touch, then seemed to recognize her. His voice came out hoarse, as if he had been crying for a long time. "We didn't mean to spill it. We didn't mean to." "Spill what, love?" Sharon pulled off her shawl and wrapped it around Caroline, who had stopped crying but now stared at nothing with glassy, frightened eyes. "The tea," Edmund whispered. Miss Maggie was showing us how to pour properly, and Caroline's hands were shaking in the pot. His voice broke. She said, "We were clumsy and ungrateful. She said Mama would be ashamed of us." Sharon felt something cold and vicious coil in her stomach. And then she said we needed to learn what it meant to be alone in the dark, that children who could not be trusted with simple tasks deserve to sit in the dark until they understand discipline. Edmund's small hand clutched Sharon's sleeve. She said Papa was too soft with us, that she would teach us properly. Caroline finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. She locked the door. Sharon looked up at the cellar door and saw the iron bolt drawn across from the outside. Miss Maggie had not simply sent them down here as punishment. She had imprisoned them in the cold and the dark. Two small children who had done nothing but be children. "How long have you been here?" Sharon asked, though she was afraid of the answer. "Since supper," Edmund said. "We thought Papa would come. We waited for Papa. 2 hours, perhaps 3. Long enough for the cold to seep into their bones. Long enough for fear to replace tears." Sharon gathered them both into her arms and stood, ignoring the protests of her back. They weighed almost nothing. "Come with me. Quickly now and quietly." She carried them up the stairs through the silent corridors and into the nursery where the fire had long since died. She set them on the bed and wrapped them in every blanket she could find, then knelt before the hearth to coax the embers back to life. "Will you tell Papa?" Edmund asked behind her. Sharon struck the flint again, watching sparks catch on the kindling. Would she tell the Duke? Could she? A maid accusing his fiancé of cruelty to his children. It was her word against the word of a lady. She would be dismissed before dawn, cast out without reference or character. But if she said nothing, this would happen again, and again, until these bright, sweet children became hollow shadows of themselves, broken by a woman who saw them only as obstacles. The fire caught, flames licking up through the wood. Sharon turned back to the twins and smoothed Edmund's hair from his forehead. "I will make certain your papa knows," she said quietly. "I promise you that." Caroline's small hand found hers. "Don't let her come back tonight." "I won't," Sharon said, though she had no authority to make such a promise. "Sleep now. I'll stay right here." She settled into the chair beside their bed and watched their breathing slowly steady. And as the clock struck 11, Sharon made her decision. Tomorrow, she would write to the Duke. She would risk everything, because some things were worth more than safety. Sharon had meant to write the letter that morning. She had risen early, slipped down to the kitchen before the scullery maid stirred, and borrowed a stub of pencil and a scrap of paper from the household accounts book. She had even composed the first line in her head as she climbed back up the servant's stair. "Your Grace, I must speak to you about a matter concerning your children." But doubt had crept in with the dawn light. What proof did she have? The twins' trembling testimony? The cold cellar? Miss Maggie would deny everything, and the Duke would believe his elegant fiancée over a housemaid with ink-stained fingers and no family name to shield her. So Sharon had tucked the paper into her apron pocket and gone about her duties, telling herself she would find another way, a better way, a way that would not end with her belongings tied in a bundle and the estate gates closing behind her forever. Then she saw what happened in the music room. It was mid-afternoon, and Sharon had been sent to dust the pianoforte and straighten the sheet music that had been left scattered across the bench. She moved quietly, as always, her cloth whispering across the polished wood. The room was supposed to be empty. Miss Maggie had taken tea in the drawing room, and the children were meant to be at their lessons with the governess. But the door to the small adjoining practice room stood ajar, and through it came voices. "I asked you a simple question, Caroline." Miss Maggie's tone was silk wrapped around iron. Where's the music I assigned you to memorize? Sharon froze, her hand still on the pianoforte's lid. I left it in the nursery, came Caroline's small, frightened voice. I forgot to bring it down. I'm sorry, Miss Maggie, I'll fetch it right now. You will do no such thing. The sound of footsteps, sharp heels against hardwood. Do you know what happens to girls who cannot follow instructions? I said I was sorry. Sorry is a word for the weak-minded. Sorry is what common children say when they fail. You are the daughter of a duke, and you will learn that failure has consequences. Sharon set down her cloth and moved toward the doorway, her heart hammering against her ribs. She should not interfere. It was not her place. But something in Miss Maggie's voice, cold and deliberately cruel, made her feet move before her mind could stop them. She reached the practice room just as Miss Maggie seized Caroline's wrist and wrenched the child's arm upward at an angle that made Sharon's stomach turn. Perhaps if you spend the afternoon standing in this corner with your arms raised, you will remember to bring your music tomorrow, and the next day, and every day after until you learn what it means to be disciplined. Caroline's face had gone white, her eyes wide with pain and shock. She tried to pull away, but Miss Maggie's grip only tightened. Let go of her. Sharon's voice cut through the room before she could think better of it. Miss Maggie turned slowly, her expression shifting from cold authority to something far more dangerous. She released Caroline's wrist with deliberate care, then smoothed her skirts as if nothing had happened. I beg your pardon? Her eyebrows arched. Did you just presume to give me an order? Sharon forced herself to meet the woman's gaze. The child is hurt, Miss Maggie. I only thought. You are not paid to think. You are paid to clean and scrub and keep your opinions to yourself. Miss Maggie stepped closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. And if you imagine for one moment that His Grace will believe your word over mine, you are even more foolish than you appear. Now get out before I have you dismissed for insubordination. Sharon looked past her Caroline, who cradled her wrist against her chest, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. Edmund had appeared in the doorway behind them, his face pale with helpless fury. Yes, Miss Maggie, Sharon said quietly. She dropped a curtsy and left the room, her hands shaking so badly she had to clasp them together to keep them still. She did not return to her dusting. Instead, she walked directly to the servants' hall, pulled the folded paper from her apron pocket, and sat down at the scarred wooden table where the staff took their meals. Her hand trembled as she pressed a pencil to paper, but her resolve did not waver. Your Grace, I write to you at great risk to my position, but my conscience will not allow me to remain silent. Your children are in danger. Miss Maggie's treatment of them goes far beyond discipline. Last night, I found them locked in the cellar, shivering and terrified. Today I witnessed her injure Lady Caroline in a moment of cruelty disguised as instruction. I know you have no reason to believe a servant over a lady of quality. I know this letter may cost me everything, but if something were to happen to those children, and I had said nothing, I could not live with myself. I beg you to observe Miss Maggie when she believes herself unwatched. You will see what I have seen. Your faithful servant, Sharon Hartley. She folded the paper twice, sealed it with a drop of candle wax, and wrote His Grace, the Duke of Weatherford, private and urgent across the front in her neatest hand. Then, before fear could stop her, she carried it upstairs and slipped it beneath the door to the Duke's study. It was done, for better or worse. She had cast her lot. Now all she could do was wait, and pray that love for his children outweighed the Duke's pride. James found the letter just after sunset, wedged beneath the study door, where someone had pushed it with enough force to bend the corner. The wax seal was crude, clearly melted from a household candle rather than proper sealing wax, and the handwriting was careful but unpracticed. the script of someone who wrote rarely and took great pains when they did. He broke the seal standing there in the doorway, his evening jacket still unbuttoned from dinner. By the second line, his blood had gone cold. He read it twice, then a third time, each word striking like a physical blow. Locked in the cellar, shivering and terrified, injured Lady Caroline. The accusations were specific, detailed, impossible to dismiss as mere jealousy or servants' gossip. But they were also impossible to believe. Diane had been nothing but gracious in his presence, poised, cultured, attentive to every detail of household management. She spoke to the twins with measured patience, correcting their posture and their diction as any proper guardian would. If she was stern, well, children needed structure. They needed discipline after 3 years of a household adrift in grief. And yet, James thought of Edmund's reluctance when Mrs. Pemberton had summoned the children to Diane. He thought of how small they had seemed lately, how quiet. He thought of Caroline's hand clutching his cravat as if afraid to let go. He thought of the cellar, cold and dark and utterly unsuitable for children. The letter did not feel like a lie. It felt like desperation. James crossed his desk and pulled the bell cord. His valet appeared within moments, slightly breathless from the speed of his ascent. "Pack my travel case," James said, his voice carefully neutral. "I leave for London first thing tomorrow. Business with my solicitor. Should take 3 days at least." "Very good, Your Grace. Shall I inform Miss Maggie?" "I will tell her myself at breakfast." The valet bowed and withdrew. James waited until his footsteps faded down the corridor, then moved to the window and stared out at the darkening grounds. He would not go to London. He would make a great show of departing. Carriage brought round, luggage loaded, farewells given. But he would travel only as far as the village inn, leave his belongings there, and return to Weatherford Hall after nightfall through the servants' entrance. If Sharon Hartley's accusations were false, he would know by tomorrow evening. If they were true, his hands curled into fists against the windowsill. If they were true, he had brought a viper into his children's home. The next morning broke clear and cold. James descended to breakfast in his traveling clothes and announced his departure with precisely the right note of weary obligation. Diane expressed polite regret at his absence and assured him she would manage the household affairs with her customary efficiency. "And the children?" James asked, watching her face carefully. "You will look after them while I'm away?" "Of course, my dear Duke." Her smile was warm, her hand gentle on his sleeve. "You need not worry. I shall ensure they continue their lessons without interruption. Structure is so important for young minds." There was nothing in her expression but concern, nothing in her voice but kindness. James almost doubted the letter. Almost. "I leave them in your capable hands," he said, and meant it as both permission and test. By mid-morning, the household had gathered in the entrance hall to see him off. The staff lined up according to rank. Diane stood poised at the top of the steps, and the twins, freshly scrubbed and dressed in their best, waved dutifully as the carriage pulled away. James watched Weatherford Hall recede through the rear window until it disappeared behind the line of elms. Then he rapped on the roof and called up to his driver, "Thomas, take me only as far as the King's Arms. I have business in the village that may take some time." "Very good, Your Grace." At the inn, James paid for a room he would not use and instructed the innkeeper to stable his horses for 3 days. Then he waited until dusk painted the sky in shades of amber and violet before setting out on foot across the fields that bordered his own estate. He knew every path, every gate, every weakness in the hedgerows. He had run these grounds as a boy, hidden in these woods during games with his brother, stolen through these gardens to meet Catherine before their engagement was formally announced. Now he used that knowledge to slip back into his own home like a thief. The servant's entrance was unguarded, as he'd known it would be. The kitchen staff were at their supper, the upper servants attending to their evening duties. James climbed the back stairs of the third floor, his footsteps silent on the worn carpet, and positioned himself in the linen closet directly adjacent to the nursery. Through the gap in the door, he could see a sliver of the nursery room, the edge of the children's table, the corner of their bookshelf, the fireplace where flames danced against the evening chill. And there, he waited. If Diane was cruel, she would show herself when she believed no one was watching. If she was innocent, he would owe her an apology and share in Hartley her dismissal. But as the clock struck 7 and he heard footsteps approaching down the corridor, James found himself praying that the maid had been wrong. Because if she had been right, then he had failed his children in the worst possible way. James had been crouched in the linen closet for nearly an hour when he heard Diane's voice in the corridor, sharp and clear as breaking glass. "No, Mrs. Pemberton, I do not require your assistance this evening. I am perfectly capable of overseeing the children's bedtime routine myself. In fact, I insist upon it. How else am I to train them properly if I am forever coddled by nervous servants?" Mrs. Pemberton's response was too quiet to hear, but her footsteps retreated quickly down the hall. Through the gap in the closet door, James watched Diane enter the nursery. The twins sat at their small table, Caroline laboring over a copybook, while Edmund stacked wooden blocks with careful concentration. Sharon stood near the fireplace, folding clean linens with quiet efficiency. For a moment, Diane simply stood in the doorway, observing. Then her expression shifted. The gracious smile melting away like frost under sudden sun, replaced by something cold and contemptuous. "Put those ridiculous toys away," she said, her voice stripped of all the warmth she had shown at breakfast. "Edmund, you are 4 years old, not an infant. Building blocks are for children who cannot manage proper lessons." Edmund's hand stilled. "Papa said I could play with them." "Your papa is not here." Diane crossed the room and swept the blocks off the table with one sharp motion. They clattered across the floor, scattering into corners. "Your papa is in London, and I am in charge. You will learn that my word is law in this house, or you will learn it locked in the dark again. Do I make myself clear?" Edmund's face crumpled, but he bit his lip and nodded. James felt his jaw clench, so hard his teeth ached. His hand moved toward the door handle, every instinct screaming to burst from his hiding place and end this immediately. But something held him back, the need to see everything, to understand the full depth of what his children had endured. Diane turned her attention to Caroline, who had gone pale and still, her pencil frozen above the page. "And you? Let me see what you have written." She snatched the copybook and held it up to the lamplight, her lip curling in disgust. "Appalling. Your letters are crooked, your spacing is inconsistent, and you have misspelled obedience. How fitting." She dropped the book on the table with enough force to make Caroline flinch. "You will copy this page 10 more times before you sleep. And if I find a single error, you will do it again. Miss Maggie, please." Sharon stepped forward, her voice carefully respectful but firm. "Lady Caroline has been working for 3 hours already. She needs rest." "Did I ask for your opinion?" Diane rounded on her, and James saw the flash of pure venom in her eyes. "You are a maid, a servant. You will speak when spoken to and not before. Or perhaps you would like to join the children in the cellar. I understand you have a fondness for cold, dark spaces." Sharon's face went white, but she held her ground. "I only meant to say that children need proper sleep to learn effectively. Children need discipline to become worthy of their station." Diane took a step closer, her voice dropping to a hiss that carried clearly to James's hiding spot. "These spoiled, weak little creatures are a disgrace to the Curtis name. Their mother coddled them, and their father is too blinded by sentiment to see what they truly are, obstacles." hindrances to everything this family should become. Edmund made a small, wounded sound. Caroline's tears began to fall silently onto her ruined copybook. "You will not speak of their mother," Sharon said, her voice shaking now with anger rather than fear. "You have no right. I have every right. I will be Duchess of Weatherford, and these children will obey me or suffer the consequences. Starting now." Diane seized Caroline's arm and yanked her from her chair. 10 pages, I said. "You will stand at this table and write until you collapse if necessary. And you," she turned to Edmund, her free hand raised as if to strike him. James moved before conscious thought could stop him. The closet door flew open, and he stepped into the nursery, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. "You will not touch my children." Diane spun around, her face draining of all color. Her hand was still raised, frozen in the air above Edmund's head. For one long, terrible moment, no one moved. No one breathed. Then Diane's expression shifted, her features rearranging themselves into shock and confusion. "James, Your Grace, I did not expect." Clearly, he crossed the room in 3 strides and placed himself between Diane and the children. Sharon had already moved to gather the twins, pulling them behind her like a shield. "I heard everything, Diane. Every word, every threat, every cruelty you thought hidden from my eyes." "You misunderstand," Diane said, her voice rising with desperate calculation. "I was merely disciplining them. They had been willful and disobedient, and I was trying to instill proper—" "Stop." James's voice was quiet now, but held more fury than any shout. "Do not insult my intelligence with lies. I know what you are. I have seen what you are." He looked past her to where his children clung to Sharon, their faces streaked with tears, their small bodies trembling. Edmund's scattered blocks lay across the floor like the ruins of innocence. And James understood with sickening clarity that Sharon Hartley had saved his children from something far worse than he had imagined. James had been crouched in the linen closet for nearly an hour when he heard Diane's voice in the corridor, sharp and clear as breaking glass. "No, Mrs. Pemberton, I do not require your assistance this evening. I am perfectly capable of overseeing the children's bedtime routine myself. In fact, I insist upon it. How else am I to train them properly if I am forever coddled by nervous servants?" Mrs. Pemberton's response was too quiet to hear, but her footsteps retreated quickly down the hall. Through the gap in the closet door, James watched Diane enter the nursery. The twins sat at their small table, Caroline laboring over a copybook, while Edmund stacked wooden blocks with careful concentration. Sharon stood near the fireplace, folding clean linens with quiet efficiency. For a moment, Diane simply stood in the doorway, observing. Then her expression shifted. The gracious smile melting away like frost under sudden sun, replaced by something cold and contemptuous. "Put those ridiculous toys away," she said, her voice stripped of all the warmth she had shown at breakfast. "Edmund, you are 4 years old, not an infant. Building blocks are for children who cannot manage proper lessons." Edmund's hand stilled. "Papa said I could play with them." "Your papa is not here." Diane crossed the room and swept the blocks off the table with one sharp motion. They clattered across the floor, scattering into corners. "Your papa is in London, and I am in charge. You will learn that my word is law in this house, or you will learn it locked in the dark again. Do I make myself clear?" Edmund's face crumpled, but he bit his lip and nodded. James felt his jaw clench, so hard his teeth ached. His hand moved toward the door handle, every instinct screaming to burst from his hiding place and end this immediately. But something held him back, the need to see everything, to understand the full depth of what his children had endured. Diane turned her attention to Caroline, who had gone pale and still, her pencil frozen above the page. "And you?" Let me see what you have written." She snatched the copybook and held it up to the lamplight, her lip curling in disgust. "Appalling. Your letters are crooked, your spacing is inconsistent, and you have misspelled obedience. How fitting." She dropped the book on the table with enough force to make Caroline flinch. "You will copy this page 10 more times before you sleep. And if I find a single error, you will do it again. Miss Maggie, please." Sharon stepped forward, her voice carefully respectful but firm. "Lady Caroline has been working for 3 hours already. She needs rest." "Did I ask for your opinion?" Diane rounded on her, and James saw the flash of pure venom in her eyes. "You are a maid, a servant. You will speak when spoken to and not before. Or perhaps you would like to join the children in the cellar. I understand you have a fondness for cold, dark spaces." Sharon's face went white, but she held her ground. "I only meant to say that children need proper sleep to learn effectively. Children need discipline to become worthy of their station." Diane took a step closer, her voice dropping to a hiss that carried clearly to James's hiding spot. "These spoiled, weak little creatures are a disgrace to the Curtis name. Their mother coddled them, and their father is too blinded by sentiment to see what they truly are: obstacles, hindrances to everything this family should become." Edmund made a small, wounded sound. Caroline's tears began to fall silently onto her ruined copybook. "You will not speak of their mother," Sharon said, her voice shaking now with anger rather than fear. "You have no right. I have every right. I will be Duchess of Weatherford, and these children will obey me or suffer the consequences. Starting now." Diane seized Caroline's arm and yanked her from her chair. 10 pages, I said. "You will stand at this table and write until you collapse if necessary. And you," she turned to Edmund, her free hand raised as if to strike him. James moved before conscious thought could stop him. The closet door flew open, and he stepped into the nursery, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. "You will not touch my children." Diane spun around, her face draining of all color. Her hand was still raised, frozen in the air above Edmund's head. For one long, terrible moment, no one moved. No one breathed. Then Diane's expression shifted, her features rearranging themselves into shock and confusion. "James, your grace, I did not expect." Clearly, he crossed the room in 3 strides and placed himself between Diane and the children. Sharon had already moved to gather the twins, pulling them behind her like a shield. "I heard everything, Diane. Every word, every threat, every cruelty you thought hidden from my eyes." "You misunderstand," Diane said, her voice rising with desperate calculation. "I was merely disciplining them. They had been willful and disobedient, and I was trying to instill proper—" "Stop." James's voice was quiet now, but held more fury than any shout. "Do not insult my intelligence with lies. I know what you are. I have seen what you are." He looked past her to where his children clung to Sharon, their faces streaked with tears, their small bodies trembling. Edmund's scattered blocks lay across the floor like the ruins of innocence. And James understood with sickening clarity that Sharon Hartley had saved his children from something far worse than he had imagined. The letters began arriving 3 days after Diane's departure. They came in thick cream envelopes sealed with the crests of families James had known since childhood. Families whose approval had once seemed as essential as air. The Earl of Pemberton wrote with icy formality to express his disappointment in James's regrettable lapse in judgment. Lady Ashford, Diane's aunt, penned 4 pages of vitriol suggesting that James had been seduced by a scheming servant and had brought shame upon all of noble birth. Lord Whitmore, who had once been his father's closest friend, simply returned the invitation to his annual hunting party with a single word scrawled across it: declined. James read each letter in his study, then filed them away in a drawer he rarely opened. The weight of their disapproval pressed against his shoulders like winter frost, but it did not break him. What troubled him more was the letter from his solicitor. Your Grace, I feel compelled to inform you that Mr. Maggie has withdrawn all financial commitments previously discussed. Furthermore, several of your other investors have expressed concerns about your judgment and have requested meetings to discuss the security of their interests. I strongly advise you to consider what steps might be taken to repair your reputation within the ton. In other words, apologize to Diane, reinstate the engagement, or watch Weatherford Hall collapse around him. James set the letter aside and looked out the window where Edmund and Caroline played in the garden. Sharon walked behind them, her arms full of fallen leaves they had gathered for some elaborate game involving fairy houses and autumn kingdoms. Caroline's laughter carried through glass, bright and unguarded in a way it had not been since before Catherine died. He had made the right choice. He knew that in his bones. But right choices still came with consequences. The following week brought a visit from his cousin, Lord Richard Curtis, who arrived unannounced and clearly prepared for battle. James received him in the library, where the unpaid bills still sat in neat stacks on his desk. Have you lost your mind? Richard demanded before the butler had even closed the door. Breaking an engagement with the Maggie family over the complaints of the housemaid? James, the entire ton is laughing at you. They are calling you weak, saying you cannot control your own household. I broke the engagement because my fiancée was cruel to my children. James poured brandy for them both with steady hands. I would do it again. She was disciplining them. That is what stepmothers do. They provide structure that grieving fathers are too soft-hearted to enforce. Richard took the glass, but did not drink. You have torpedoed your financial security and your social standing for the sake of sentiment. For the sake of my children's safety. On the word of a servant. James, do you not see how this looks? A duke taking the testimony of a maid over that of a lady? It overturns a natural order. It suggests that rank and breeding mean nothing. Perhaps they should mean nothing when weighed against truth and decency. James met his cousin's gaze without flinching. I watched Diane abuse my children. Richard, I heard her call them obstacles. I saw her raise her hand to strike my son. No amount of social standing excuses that. Richard's jaw tightened. And what of Weatherford? What of your legacy? Your father will be appalled to see how you are destroying everything he built. The word struck deeper than James cared to admit. He thought of his father, stern and proud, who had valued duty above all else, who had arranged his own marriage based on advantage, and had taught James from childhood that personal feelings were secondary to family obligation. My father, James said quietly, never had to choose between his estate and his children. I pray he would have chosen as I did. You are deluding yourself. Richard set down his untouched brandy with enough force to slosh liquid across the silver tray. Within 6 months, you will lose this house. You will lose your lands. And your children will suffer far more than they ever would have under Diane Maggie's discipline. I hope you can live with that. He left without farewell, his footsteps echoing through the empty hall. James remained at the window long after his cousin's carriage disappeared down the drive. The weight of tradition pressed against him. Centuries of Curtis pride and power, all of it crumbling because he had chosen love over advantage. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Sharon appeared in the doorway, her expression hesitant. Forgive me, Your Grace, but the children asked if you might join them for tea in the nursery. They have made something they wish to show you. James turned from the window and saw genuine concern in her eyes. She had heard Richard shouting. She knew what this choice was costing him. Tell them I shall be there directly, he said. When he reached the nursery, he found the table set with mismatched cups and plates from their toy collection. Edmund had drawn a picture of their family, 4 stick figures holding hands beneath a crooked sun. Caroline had made a crown from twisted paper and offered it to him with solemn ceremony. "You are the best papa in the world," she said. "Better than all the other papas." Edmund nodded vigorously. "Better than King George, even." James looked at their shining faces, at Sharon's gentle smile as she poured imaginary tea into tiny porcelain cups, and felt something shift in his chest. The weight of tradition remained heavy and unforgiving. But here, in this bright nursery with his children safe and happy, he found something far more precious than his peers' approval. He found peace. "I am honored to accept this crown," he said, kneeling so Caroline could place it on his head, "though I fear I shall need better subjects than you two rascals." "We are excellent subjects," Edmund protested. "We never complain about anything." "Never," Caroline agreed, then immediately contradicted herself. "Except when Sharon says we must go to bed." Their laughter filled the room like sunlight, and James decided that if this was ruin, he would embrace it gladly. The routine began without deliberate planning. James found himself taking breakfast in the nursery rather than the dining room, where the empty chairs reminded him of all he had lost and sacrificed. The twins would chatter about their dreams while Sharon prepared their morning lessons, and somehow the three of them would turn arithmetic into a game involving pirates and treasure maps. It was Sharon who suggested they use dried beans to teach counting. Sharon who noticed that Caroline learned better when allowed to move while reciting her letters. Sharon who understood that Edmund's endless questions were not defiance but hunger for knowledge. Mrs. Pemberton had offered, delicately, to hire a proper governess. James had declined. He was not certain he could trust another stranger with his children's care, and besides, Sharon had proven herself more capable than any credentialed woman from London could be. It was during one of these informal lessons that James first recognized what was happening between them. They had taken the children to the orchard on an unseasonably warm afternoon. Edmund had climbed too high in the apple tree and frozen, suddenly aware of the distance to the ground. While James called useless encouragement from below, Sharon had simply climbed up beside the boy, speaking to him in low, calm tones until his breathing steadied and he found the courage to climb down. "How did you know what to say?" James asked later, while the children gathered fallen apples in their baskets. Sharon glanced at him, surprise flickering across her features as if she had forgotten he was there. "My brother used to climb too high in panic. I learned that telling someone they're brave is less useful than reminding them they are capable." "You have a brother?" "Had." She bent to retrieve an apple, her voice carefully neutral. "He died when I was 12. Fever took him in 3 days." James felt a familiar ache of shared grief. "I am sorry, as am I for your loss, Your Grace." She straightened, meeting his eyes with unexpected directness. "But grief is strange, is it not? It never truly leaves, but somehow we learn to carry it differently. The children will learn too, in time. You speak of them as if you understand what they feel. Perhaps because I do." She handed Caroline an apple and smiled as the child examined it for worms. "Loss changes us, but it need not destroy us." The words settled into James's chest with the weight of truth. For 3 years, he had believed that duty and discipline could fill the void Catherine left. He had sought a proper lady to restore order to his household, someone who understood rank and propriety and the weight of the Curtis name. But Sharon understood something far more valuable. She understood his children. Over the following weeks, James found himself seeking her opinion on matters that should have been decided by the Duke alone. Should they dismiss the old music teacher who made Caroline cry? Sharon thought yes, and suggested they let the children learn through singing games instead. Should Edmund be punished for tracking mud through the entrance hall? Sharon thought the boy should clean it himself and learn the consequence of carelessness without shame. She was right every time. More than that, she made his children happy. Edmund's nightmares had stopped. Caroline no longer flinched when footsteps approached her door. They laughed freely, played wildly, and trusted completely, because Sharon had shown them that safety and love could coexist with structure and learning. One evening, James came upon her in the library. She stood before the shelves with a book in her hands, clearly having borrowed it without permission. She startled when she saw him, the book nearly slipping from her grasp. "Forgive me, Your Grace. I should have asked. What are you reading?" He moved closer, genuinely curious. She showed him the spine. The collected works of William Wordsworth. "I found it years ago when I was dusting. I have been reading it in pieces ever since, always putting it back before anyone noticed." "You enjoy poetry?" "I enjoy words." A faint color rose in her cheeks. The way they can make you feel things you did not know you could feel. The way they can make a small life seem larger. James took the book from her hands and opened it to a marked page. "The world is too much with us. Late and soon, getting and spending, we lay waste our powers." He read the lines aloud, then looked at her. "Is that how you see the world? Laid waste by getting and spending?" "I see a world that values the wrong things," she said quietly. "Rank over kindness, wealth over wisdom, appearance over truth." She paused, as if realizing she had overstepped. "But I am only a maid. What I know of such matters. You know more than most ladies of my acquaintance." The words emerged before he could consider their impropriety. "You understand what truly matters, Sharon. You always have." The use of her Christian name hung between them like confession. Sharon's eyes widened, but she did not correct him or retreat behind the safety of formality. "Your Grace." "James," he said. "When we are alone, you may call me James." "That would not be proper." "Propriety," he said softly, "is what nearly destroyed my children. I find I have little use for it anymore." Sharon looked at him for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then Caroline's voice called from the corridor, seeking Sharon's help with her bedtime prayers, and the moment fractured. But as Sharon left the library, the book still in her hands with his permission, James understood with startling clarity what his heart had been trying to tell him for weeks. He was falling in love with her, not with the idea of her, not with gratitude or obligation, but with the woman herself. Her courage, her wisdom, her gentle strength that had saved his family when no one else could. And that realization terrified him more than any social ruin ever could. Winter came early to Weatherford Hall that year, bringing snow that transformed the estate into something from a fairy story. The financial troubles remained. Creditors still wrote demanding letters. Tenants still struggled with their rents. But somehow the house felt warmer than it had in years. James had made his decision during the first snowfall, watching from his study window as Sharon taught the twins to build a snowman in the garden. Edmund had insisted on using a carrot for the nose, while Caroline argued passionately for a turnip. Sharon had settled the dispute by suggesting they use both, creating a two-nosed snowman that sent the children into fits of laughter. That was when James knew, not in a sudden rush of passion, but in a quiet certainty that settled into his bones like coming home. He waited until the children were asleep that evening, then asked Mrs. Pemberton to send Sharon to the nursery. When she arrived, confusion evident in her expression, he was standing by the fireplace where he had hidden weeks ago to spy on Diane. "Your Grace?" "Mrs. Pemberton said you wished to see me." Sharon's hands twisted nervously in her apron. "If this is about the book, I promise I've been careful with it." "This is not about the book." James gestured to the chair beside the fire. "Please sit." She hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with such familiarity, but obeyed. James remained standing, suddenly aware that he had rehearsed no speeches, prepared no elegant words. He had only truth, plain and unadorned. "Sharon, I find myself in an impossible position." He began to pace, unable to remain still. The world expects me to marry a woman of rank, someone who can restore my finances and secure my social standing, someone who understands the duties of a duchess and can navigate the complexities of a ton. Sharon's face went carefully blank. I understand, Your Grace. You need not explain. But I do not want what the world expects. He stopped pacing and faced her directly. I want someone who understands my children, someone who sees them as they truly are, not as obstacles or projects to be managed, someone who climbs trees to calm frightened boys and turns arithmetic into pirate adventures. He moved closer, his voice softening. I want someone who risks everything to protect the innocent, someone who reads Wordsworth by candlelight and believes that kindness matters more than rank. Sharon's eyes widened, her breath catching. Your Grace, you cannot mean. I want you, Sharon. He knelt before her chair, taking her hands in his. They were rough from work, warm and real. I am asking you to be my wife. Not my housekeeper, not my children's nursemaid, but my Duchess, the mother they need, the partner I have been searching for. Without knowing it, tears spilled down her cheeks. James, the scandal! Your family will disown you. Society will never accept a maid as Duchess of Weatherford. Society has already rejected me for choosing my children over convenience. What more can they do? He squeezed her hands gently. I would rather live in an honest cottage with you than in a grand estate with someone who makes my children afraid. I would rather face ruin beside you than prosperity with anyone else. What of your cousin? The letters? Everything you are risking is nothing compared to what I gain. He reached into his waistcoat and withdrew the Curtis family ring, the same ring Diane had slapped from his hand. He had found it under the wardrobe the next morning and had carried it with him ever since, waiting for the right moment. This ring has been in my family for 5 generations. It should go to someone worthy of it, someone brave and kind and true. Will you have it, Sharon? Will you have me? She looked at the ring, then at his face, then at the nursery around them, the room where she had protected his children, where he had witnessed Diane's cruelty, where their family had been broken and remade. When she spoke, her voice trembled but held no doubt. Yes, she whispered. Yes, James, I will. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all along. The wedding took place 6 weeks later in the small church on the estate grounds. No grand lords attended. No society ladies filled the pews. But the tenants came and the servants, and a handful of James's true friends who valued character over rank. Edmund and Caroline served as attendants, solemn and proud in their best clothes. Edmund held the rings on a velvet cushion, while Caroline scattered wildflowers down the aisle with serious concentration. When James lifted Sharon's veil and saw her radiant smile, he heard whispers ripple through the congregation, shock and disapproval from those who could not understand. But when he kissed his bride, the whispers were drowned out by genuine applause from those who had witnessed what Sharon truly was. Not a maid, not a servant, but the woman who had saved them all. The wedding breakfast was held in the great hall, where the children insisted on making speeches that consisted mostly of knock-knock jokes and declarations that Sharon made the best toast in England. The cake was simple, the decorations modest, but laughter echoed to the hall in a way it had not since Catherine's death. As evening fell and the guests departed, James found Sharon in the nursery, watching the children sleep. She still wore her wedding dress, simple cream silk with wildflowers woven into her hair. "Are you frightened?" he asked, joining her by the window. "Terrified," she admitted. "I do not know how to be a duchess. I do not know the dances or the proper forms of address or which fork to use at formal dinners." "Then you will learn, just as you learn everything else, with courage and grace." He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. Besides, I suspect Weatherford Hall is done with formal dinners for some time. We shall have to make our own traditions now. What kind of traditions? Loud ones, messy ones, full of laughter and muddy boots and children who climb too high in trees. He turned her to face him. Honest ones, Sharon. That is all I ask. She smiled and kissed him softly. Then, that is what we shall build. An honest home for an honest family. And in that moment, standing in the nursery with his wife in his arms and his children safe in their beds, James Curtis understood that he had not lost everything when he broke his engagement to Diane Maggie. He had found everything that mattered.
Wow, thank you so much for watching. Seriously, your support means the world to me. If you enjoyed this video, the biggest way you can show me love and encourage me to keep creating is to hit that like button and subscribe. Takes 1 second, but it makes a huge difference. Speaking of more videos, I've got another exciting one lined up for you. Just click on the next video showing right on your screen now to keep the fun going. See you there.